There's something quietly happening in the stores you walk into every week, not on the news, not in any headline, but if you have been paying attention, really paying attention, you have already felt it. A brand you have bought for 20 years is suddenly just gone. The shelf space where it used to sit has been filled with something shinier, something newer, something that costs twice as much and lasts half as long. And nobody seems to be talking about it. Not your neighbors, not the store employees who shrug and say they do not know when it is coming back. Nobody. But here is what is actually happening beneath that silence, and why it matters far more than a simple supply chain story. What is vanishing from American shelves right now is not just product. It is the practical knowledge of how to live without being entirely dependent on a system that is slowly removing your options, one item at a time. You may not think of yourself as someone who stockpiles things or prepares for disruptions. Most people do not. Most people assume that whatever they need will always be available if they are willing to pay for it. But the quiet disappearance of 10 specific products tells a different story. A story about what happens when the economy decides that your independence is less profitable than your dependence. And once you see this pattern, you cannot unsee it. The first product on this list is one that built the floors, the furniture, and the finished wood of nearly every American home constructed before 1960. Real gum spirits of turpentine. Not the petroleum-based mineral spirits sitting in the paint aisle with a turpentine label printed on it. Real turpentine, distilled directly from living pine resin, harvested from the longleaf pine forests of the southeastern United States. The industry that produced it had been running continuously since the colonial period. And in the last 3 years, the last major domestic producer has essentially shut down operations. What you find on shelves today under the turpentine label is largely a synthetic substitute that looks similar, smells similar, and performs completely differently. Research from Penn State Extension has documented that genuine pine resin turpentine contains alpha-pinene compounds that penetrate and bond with wood at a molecular level, protecting it in a way that synthetics chemically cannot replicate. The furniture your great-grandmother polished with real turpentine is still standing. The furniture finished with the modern version will not make it to another generation in the same condition. And most people buying it today have no idea they are buying a substitute. The second product is something so familiar it almost seems impossible that it could be disappearing. Borax. Real 20-mule team borax, sodium tetraborate in the yellow and green box, the mineral compound that sat under American kitchen sinks for over 100 years. It is being quietly reformulated, its box sizes reduced without announcement, and in several states it is being pulled from general retail use with new labeling restrictions that treat it as something dangerous. But borax is a mineral. It has been used in American households since 1891. It cleaned laundry, treated minor wounds, preserved food, killed cockroaches, protected barn timbers from termites, and served as a base for dozens of home formulas that once made a single box worth 10 times what you paid for it. The reason it is being quietly restricted is not that it became more dangerous. The reason, when you follow the regulatory history carefully, is that it was too effective and too cheap. A box of borax in 1955 cost 18 cents and replaced what is now sold to you as 15 separate specialty products. That kind of value does not fit the modern retail model. And so, slowly and without ceremony, it disappears. The third product on this list is one that most people under 40 have never heard of, but that anyone who grew up around leatherwork, saddle making, clock repair, or fine woodworking will recognize immediately. Real neat's foot oil, rendered from cattle shin bones, and pure lanolin in its unaltered form. These were the compounds that kept leather alive for decades. Not conditioned for a season, actually alive. Supple, water-resistant, and structurally sound. The synthetic blends being sold as replacements today smell different, feel different on the material, and have been documented in agricultural archive research to fail to penetrate leather fibers the way the original compounds did. There is one small renderer still producing genuine neat's foot oil from cattle in Pennsylvania. He is in his 70s with no apprentice. When he stops, that source stops. And the harnesses, work boots, saddles, and leather goods being maintained with the synthetic replacement will begin failing in ways their owners will attribute to everything, except the change in the product they are using. What makes all of this psychologically difficult to process is that the disappearance is designed to be invisible. You do not receive a notification. There is no press release. The product simply gets reformulated, gets restricted, gets moved to a smaller section of the store, gets replaced on the shelf by something with a different name and a similar looking label, and the transition happens so gradually that most people never register the moment it completed. This is not an accident. The gradual nature of product substitution is one of the most effective forms of institutional change because it bypasses your ability to object to it. You cannot object to something you do not notice. And the system has become very good at making sure you do not notice. The The fourth item is something that connects directly to the American kitchen and to the kind of cooking that produced meals that lasted, that nourished, and that did not require a replacement pan every 3 years: the original cast iron seasoning compounds. Before 2007, the partially hydrogenated cottonseed oil base used in commercial seasoning products created a polymerized bond on cast iron that was measurably harder and more durable than anything produced by the reformulated versions. Metallurgical research published by Auburn University in 2015 confirmed this. The surface, created by the old seasoning compounds, was not just darker in appearance, it was chemically bonded to the iron in a way that modern vegetable oil-based and reformulated commercial products do not replicate. Your grandmother's skillet still works because it was seasoned correctly with a compound that no longer exists in its original form. The new pans flake and chip because the seasoning that is marketed as equivalent is not equivalent. The real replacement, beef tallow rendered from sweat purchased from a local butcher, is what has been used by Amish cooks and traditional households for 2 centuries. It outperforms every modern cast iron conditioner on shelves today, and most butchers will sell you the raw suet for almost nothing because most of their customers have no idea what it is for. The fifth product is sodium hydroxide in its accessible, solid crystal form for home soap making, drain clearing, and dozens of traditional household applications. Red Devil brand lye, the product that sat under kitchen sinks across America for 8 decades, was discontinued in 2018. The reason given was safety. The actual reason, documented through regulatory records, is that the paperwork burden placed on retailers carrying it became so prohibitive that stores simply stopped stocking it. The large manufacturers who could absorb the compliance cost continued producing it for industrial applications. The small producers supplying hardware stores and rural co-ops could not continue. And so the home soap maker, the person maintaining old plumbing, the small farmer who understood exactly what they were working with and why they needed it, all of them lost access. There's a method for making lye from hardwood ashes that has been documented continuously since the 1830s. It requires nothing more than good oak, maple, or hickory ash, rainwater, and thyme. The result is potassium hydroxide, which functions identically to sodium hydroxide for soap production and cleaning applications. The method is not lost, but the people who remember it are aging, and the chain of transmission between the generation that knew it and the generation that needs it is fraying badly. The sixth product is real grade 1 kerosene. Not the sulfur-heavy, additive-laden K1 sold at outdoor pumps, but the pure, clear kerosene that burned cleanly in Aladdin mantle lamps and kept farmhouses and working households lit for 150 years without clogging wicks or producing the soot that the modern formulation generates within months of use. Threads on preparedness and homesteading forums going back to 2022 document hundreds of users across different states noticing the exact same degradation in lamp performance at the same time. All of it traceable to changes in the chemical composition of the commercially available product. The wicks that used to last years now clog in months. The burn quality that was once clean enough to read by is now rough and inconsistent. And the people who notice are mostly those still living with oil lamps as a practical, functional choice rather than a decorative one. The mainstream market long since stopped caring. The seventh item is something that sounds obscure until you understand what it means for food security at the household level. Real food grade diatomaceous earth in the bulk quantities that farmers have used for grain storage protection for generations. It is being reformulated, relabeled as a pest control product, and the bulk availability for use as a livestock feed supplement and grain bin protectant is shrinking consistently. USDA bulletins from the 1940s document the use of diatomaceous earth for farm pest management in ways that required no chemical exposure, no protective equipment beyond basic dust precautions, and no off-gassing risk in stored food. The shift away from its agricultural availability toward a pesticide-only classification is not driven by evidence that it became less safe. It is driven by market pressure from the chemical pest control industry, for which a mineral compound that is effective and cheap is a category problem. The eighth product is pure beeswax foundation sheets for home beekeeping. The commercially available foundation being sold to hobby beekeepers today has been documented in university research to contain miticide residues and synthetic chemicals absorbed during commercial hive treatment. Pure, untreated beeswax foundation, the kind that allows genuinely clean honey production and healthy hive development, is available from fewer than a handful of small suppliers in the United States, and the people running those operations are aging without succession plans. When they close, the hobby beekeeper in America will be entirely dependent on contaminated commercial supply, or will need to learn to render and press their own wax, a skill that still exists in traditional communities, but has nearly vanished from general agricultural practice. The ninth product is raw shellac flakes, the material that, when dissolved by the craftsman in denatured alcohol at the correct cut ratio, produces the most durable, most repairable, and most historically proven wood finish in the history of furniture making. Pre-mixed shellac in a can has a shelf life of roughly 6 months before it fails to cure properly. Raw shellac flakes stored correctly last indefinitely and produce a finish that a 2017 Wood Science study confirmed outlasts polyurethane coatings by a factor of 3 or more. Import restrictions on raw shellac tightened significantly in 2021. The supply available to small woodworkers and furniture restorers has dropped accordingly. The knowledge of how to mix it, what cut ratios to use for different applications, and how to repair and build upon existing shellac finishes without refinishing from scratch, all of that practical knowledge is held by a shrinking number of craftsmen who learned it before the age of spray can finishes. The 10th product is high carbon steel in the grades that small batch rural hardware suppliers once carried specifically for hand tool production, knife making, and agricultural implement forging. The mills producing steel in the 1095 and W22 carbon grades for small quantity buyers have largely converted to stainless production because the margins are structurally better. The practical difference matters enormously to anyone who works with hand tools daily. A high carbon steel blade holds an edge through months of hard use. A stainless equivalent, regardless of the marketing language on the handle, needs sharpening every few days under the same conditions. The hand-forged axes, knives, and implements produced from high carbon steel by traditional craftsmen are becoming nearly impossible to replace through commercial channels. When they wear out or are lost, the replacement available to most buyers is functionally inferior in every way that matters for actual work. What ties all 10 of these products together is not nostalgia. It is not the romanticization of a simpler time. It is something far more concrete and far more urgent. Every one of these products represents a category of knowledge, practical, tested, multi-generational knowledge about how to do a thing well without being entirely dependent on a supply chain that has demonstrated repeatedly that it will substitute, reformulate, restrict, or simply discontinue whatever is most useful to you whenever doing so serves someone else's margins better than your self-sufficiency. The old knowledge was not replaced because it stopped working. It was replaced because it worked too well, too independently, and at too low a cost to sustain the product replacement cycle that the modern consumer economy requires. You did not forget these things through negligence. You were slowly and systematically sold away from them, one reformulated label at a time. But here is the thing that matters most, and it is the reason this conversation is worth having. The knowledge itself has not disappeared. It is in documents that are still publicly accessible. It is in the practice of traditional communities who never abandoned it. It is in the memories of people who are still alive and would share it with anyone who thought to ask. The products may be leaving the shelves. The underlying understanding of why they worked and how to replicate their function does not require a shelf. It requires only that you decide the chain of practical knowledge in your family is worth picking back up. And if you have made it this far, I suspect you have already made that decision. If this kind of practical, honest, psychology-driven content is what you are looking for, subscribe to Secret Fix Vault. There is more of this waiting for you, and it only gets deeper from here.